My name is Tessa. I am 33 years old and the founder of a highly successful public relations firm in Boston. My sister rubbed her slightly rounded belly while sitting at my dining room table. "We want the house," she said with a smug smile. My husband nodded in agreement. "Sign the deed over to us, Tessa." I laughed softly and slid a sealed medical envelope across the mahogany table. "One problem," I whispered. "The doctor says you are completely sterile, Ethan. So what is actually growing inside your stomach, Sophia?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who tried to destroy your life. Growing up in an affluent Massachusetts suburb taught me very early that love was a conditional currency in my family. My parents, Linda and Greg, operated on a strict system of blatant favoritism that dictated every interaction in our household. My younger sister, Sophia, who is currently 29 years old, was their undisputed golden child. She was the brilliant medical student who could do absolutely no wrong in their eyes. I was the scapegoat, the perpetual disappointment who chose to pursue a selfish public relations career instead of a respectable medical profession. My parents never missed an opportunity to remind me that my business was just a silly hobby compared to Sophia studying to save lives. Tonight was supposed to be a celebratory family dinner at the custom-built home I shared with my husband of 4 years. Ethan is 34 years old and the founder of a struggling tech startup. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing a lavish meal, completely unaware that I was setting the stage for my own execution. The dining room glowed with warm light from the crystal chandelier overhead. I sat at the head of the long table, watching my family share a bottle of expensive champagne I had purchased specially for the occasion. Ethan sat beside Sophia, their shoulders brushing in a way that had been making my stomach tighten for several months. I had hired private investigators weeks ago when Ethan started taking mysterious late-night investor meetings for his tech company. I already knew the devastating truth about their affair, but I needed them to play their hands first. Sophia tapped her silver spoon against her crystal glass to get our attention. She looked glowing, wearing a fitted designer dress that highlighted a tiny, deliberate bump in her midsection. "Mom, Dad, Tessa." She began, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured emotion. "Ethan and I have something wonderful to share with all of you tonight. We are deeply in love, and we are expecting a baby together." The words dropped like heavy stones into the quiet room. My mother, Linda, gasped in absolute delight, immediately pushing her chair back and rushing over to wrap her arms around Sophia and Ethan. My father, Greg, beamed with intense pride, leaning across the table to pat Ethan enthusiastically on the back. No one looked at me. No one checked to see if the wife of the man who just confessed to impregnating her own sister was breathing or crying. They simply celebrated the destruction of my marriage as if it were a massive triumph. Linda finally turned to look at me, her eyes hard and completely unsympathetic. "Do not look so shocked, Tessa," my mother scolded. "You brought this entirely on yourself. You always chose your selfish public relations business over giving Ethan a proper family. You worked 80-hour weeks building your silly firm, while Sophia actually showed him what real warmth and affection looked like. Sophia is a natural mother and a future doctor. She deserves this beautiful miracle. You need to step aside gracefully and let them be happy." Ethan squeezed Sophia by the hand and looked at me with cold calculation. "We want to do this cleanly, Tessa," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the love he had promised me 4 years ago. "Sophia needs stability for the baby. We want to start our real family right here in this house. You have your business, so you can easily afford to find a new place to live. Sign the deed over to us tonight, and I promise I will not drag out the divorce proceedings in court." The absolute audacity of his demand was breathtaking. They wanted my home, the beautiful sanctuary I had paid for with my own hard work and success. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw my expensive china across the room. I simply reached down into my designer tote bag resting on the floor beside my chair. I pulled out a thick sealed envelope bearing the official logo of a prominent Boston urology clinic. I slid it smoothly across the polished mahogany table until it stopped right in front of Ethan. "What is this?" Ethan asked, a sudden flicker of uncertainty crossing his handsome features. "It is a copy of your post-operative lab report," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. The one from the highly discreet surgery you had 3 years ago. You remember Ethan, the severe varicocele complication that required emergency intervention, the surgical complication that left you 100% sterile. The silence in the dining room became absolute and suffocating. Ethan snatched the paper from the envelope. His eyes darted rapidly across the complex medical jargon, his face draining of all color until he looked physically ill. He dropped the paper onto his dinner plate as if it burned his fingers. "This is a fake," he stammered, looking frantically at Sophia and then back at my parents. "She manufactured this document because she is a bitter, barren woman who wants to ruin our happiness." Sophia lost her smug, triumphant smile completely. She looked at Ethan, then at the stark black and white medical report, her hands instinctively dropping away from her slightly rounded stomach. The brilliant medical student suddenly realized she had failed to do her basic biological homework on the man she was trying to financially trap. But my mother Linda would not accept this defeat. She violently slammed her champagne glass down onto the table, sending the expensive liquid splashing across the polished wood. "How dare you?" Linda screamed, her face contorted with unhinged rage. "You are so insanely jealous of your sister that you would forge medical documents to ruin her miracle baby. You have always been vindictive and cruel. Pack your bags right now and get out of Ethan's house. We will not let you poison this innocent child with your toxic jealousy." Ethan's house. The phrase hung in the air, sweet and loaded with impending disaster. I stood up slowly smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my skirt. "I will gladly leave," I said, smiling directly at my furious mother. "But you might want to read the deed to this property before I go, Mom. Because this house does not belong to Ethan anymore." Ethan recovered a fraction of his confidence, a cruel, mocking smirk returning to his lips. "You are actually right, Tessa," he said, puffing out his chest. "It does not belong to me, and it definitely does not belong to you. I knew you would be completely unreasonable about the divorce, so I took strict precautions. I transferred the deed into a blind limited liability company last month to protect my hard-earned assets from a greedy wife. The house belongs to a corporate entity now. You cannot touch it." I let out a genuine, joyful laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh, Ethan," I said, shaking my head in pure amusement. "You always were absolutely terrible at managing the finer details. You used a cheap online legal service to set up your little shell company. You wanted to hide the assets so badly and so quickly that you rushed through the paperwork to save money. You did not even bother to hire a real attorney to check the state corporate registry." I reached into my tote bag one last time and pulled out a thick stack of official state corporate registry documents, dropping them directly onto his sterile lab report. "You did not hide the house in a new company, Ethan. You accidentally transferred the property into an existing holding corporation, a company called Vanguard Holdings." Ethan stared at the corporate documents, his breathing growing shallow and rapid as the reality of his massive mistake began to sink in. "What does that mean?" my father Greg demanded, speaking up for the first time all evening. "It means," I said, picking up my winter coat from the back of my chair, "that Vanguard Holdings is a real estate investment firm I incorporated 5 years ago, before Ethan and I even got married. You handed my house directly back to me, Ethan. You legally signed away your marital rights to this property, the exact moment you filed that fraudulent transfer to my holding company." I pulled my heavy set of house keys from my pocket and tossed them onto the center of the table. They hit the wood with a sharp final clatter that made Sophia jump. "You have exactly 24 hours to pack your things and vacate my property before I have the local police arrest all of you for trespassing." "Oh, and Ethan." I paused at the doorway, looking back at the devastated ruins of my toxic family. "You might want to check your business banking app right now. The venture capital seed funding for your tech startup might have experienced a slight complication this morning." I turned and walked out the front door into the crisp Boston night air, leaving them to suffocate in the silence of their own total destruction. The drive away from the sprawling suburban house was the most peaceful journey I had experienced in 4 years. I navigated the quiet, freezing streets of Boston, leaving my toxic family to suffocate in the ruins of their own greed. I did not check into a hotel. I drove straight into the heart of the downtown financial district and pulled my car into the secured underground parking garage of a sleek glass-walled high-rise building. This was my actual sanctuary. A luxurious, sprawling penthouse apartment I had purchased entirely in cash over a year ago. I bought it the exact same week I first hired a private investigator to look into Ethan's mysterious late-night investor meetings. The moment I received the first set of photographs showing my husband and my sister walking into a hotel together, I stopped being a wife and became a strategist. I rode the private elevator up to the top floor, stepped into my beautifully decorated apartment, and poured myself a fresh glass of expensive red wine. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering city skyline. I was in absolute control. The next morning arrived with a barrage of frantic digital notifications. My phone screen lit up relentlessly with missed calls and enraged text messages from Ethan. I ignored every single one of them. I took my time enjoying a hot shower, drinking a perfect cup of coffee, and dressing in a tailored charcoal suit that commanded respect. By the time my private driver dropped me off at the sleek minimalist lobby of my public relations firm, the trap had already been fully sprung. As I stepped through the revolving glass doors of my office building, the sound of Ethan's desperate, unhinged shouting echoed across the Italian marble floors. He looked completely disheveled, wearing the same wrinkled clothes from the disastrous dinner the night before. His face was blotchy and red, the veins bulging in his neck as he aggressively pounded his fists against the pristine reception desk. He was screaming that I was a thief, a fraud, and a criminal. Several of my high-profile corporate clients were sitting in the waiting area, watching the spectacle with wide, astonished eyes. Ethan did not care about the audience. He demanded his life savings back, screaming for the terrified receptionist to call the police immediately. I stepped forward, my posture perfectly, rigid, my face an impenetrable mask of calm. I was flanked instantly by two massive security guards who had been tracking his meltdown since he entered the building. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "Those were not your life savings, Ethan," I said clearly, letting my voice carry across the entire quiet lobby. "That was seed funding." Ethan whipped around to face me, his chest heaving with exertion. "You drained my business accounts," he roared, pointing a shaking, accusing finger directly at my face. "I logged into the portal this morning and everything is gone. You hacked into my tech startup and stole every single dollar. You are going to federal prison, Tessa." I smiled, offering him a cool and entirely detached expression. "I did not hack anything," I corrected him calmly, stepping just out of his reach. "When you signed your initial funding agreement, you signed a contract with a strict morality clause. Since you violated that clause by engaging in a highly documented affair with my sister, the venture capital firm legally recalled their capital at 8 o'clock this morning. Your accounts sit at absolute zero because you breached your contract." Ethan sneered, spitting his words at me with desperate venom. "You do not control my investors, Tessa. You are just a publicist. You spin stories for a living. You have no authority over the people funding my technology." I tilted my head, studying him like a fascinating, pathetic insect. "Who do you think owns the venture capital firm, Ethan?" The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. I watched his arrogant, entitled expression shatter completely as the reality dawned on him. His entire tech startup, the company he used to inflate his fragile ego and constantly belittle my career, had been secretly bankrolled from the very beginning by a blind trust that I controlled. And now it had just been legally destroyed by his own wife. As the crushing, suffocating weight of his total financial failure set in, Ethan lost whatever shred of sanity he had left. He resorted to vicious, desperate personal attacks. He lunged forward, his fists clenched tight, completely ignoring the two security guards stepping quickly into his path. "Your parents were completely right about you." Ethan spat, his voice echoing off the glass walls and marble pillars. "Linda and Greg were right to never support your delusional public relations hobbies. They always knew you were a cold, bitter, unlovable woman. They were smart to funnel all their love and their money into Sophia. They told me you would end up alone. Sophia is twice the woman you will ever be, and she is actually going to give me a real family." I remained absolutely ice cold. I let him dig his own grave right there in the center of the lobby, allowing him to expose his true toxic colors in front of my elite clients and the high-definition security cameras recording every single second of his public meltdown. I did not defend myself. I did not engage with his pathetic attempts to wound my pride. I simply stood there, an immovable force, watching a weak man crumble. When he finally ran out of breath, panting heavily, and glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, I gave a subtle nod to the head of security. The guards moved in instantly with practiced efficiency. They grabbed Ethan by the arms, lifting him almost entirely off his feet. He thrashed and screamed, kicking wildly at the marble floor as they physically dragged him toward the exit. He shouted obscenities, demanding I give him his company back. I stood perfectly still, watching without a single ounce of pity as they shoved him out the heavy glass front doors and onto the busy city street. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer, offered a polite, quiet apology to my staring clients for the brief interruption, and walked into my corner office. The heavy oak door closed behind me, shutting out the murmurs of the lobby. Exactly 10 minutes later, as I was sitting behind my desk, reviewing my morning emails, my private office phone rang. The caller identification displayed my sister Sophia. I answered, putting the call on speakerphone and leaning back in my leather chair. She was practically vibrating with triumphant malice. "You think you won by taking his company?" Sophia gloated, her voice dripping with artificial confidence and entitlement. "You think leaving us without that seed funding is going to stop Ethan from building his empire? You are so stupid, Tessa. Mom and Dad just went to the bank. They took out a massive second mortgage on their retirement home this morning. They are using all the cash from the equity to completely fund Ethan's startup and to hire a bulldog lawyer to sue you into the ground." Sophia laughed, a sharp, grating sound that used to make me feel small when we were children. "They believe in Ethan more than they ever believed in you. They are willing to risk everything to make sure my baby has the perfect life. You are finished, Tessa." I did not flinch. I did not feel a single ounce of panic, anger, or regret. Instead, I reached slowly across my expansive desk and opened a sleek black leather folder that my lead asset manager had dropped off just an hour earlier. "Let them," I whispered into the receiver, my voice steady, dark, and utterly devoid of emotion. "It makes what happens tomorrow so much easier." I reached forward and pressed the button to end the call, cutting off Sophia's arrogant laughter mid-sentence. The office returned to a peaceful, productive silence. I looked down at the freshly printed, notarized documents resting inside the black folder. It was the newly signed foreclosure debt on my parents' retirement home. The massive second mortgage they had just recklessly signed away to the bank to fund a man who had already failed. A massive financial debt, which my asset management firm had quietly swooped in, purchased from the bank, and taken full absolute legal control of that very morning. 3 days after, I completely dismantled my husband's fraudulent tech startup and acquired the massive foreclosure debt on my parents' retirement home. I sat in the secluded corner of an upscale downtown coffee shop. The morning air was crisp, and the cafe smelled rich with roasted espresso and expensive pastries. I was not there to relax. I was waiting for Garrison, the elite private investigator I had retained on a generous monthly retainer. Garrison was a former federal agent who specialized in corporate espionage and high-profile domestic disputes. He moved through the crowded coffee shop with quiet efficiency, sliding into the leather booth across from me. He did not bother with pleasantries or small talk. He simply reached into his tailored jacket pocket and placed a sleek silver flash drive on the table between us. "You were absolutely right to trust your instincts," Tessa, Garrison said, keeping his voice low enough to blend into the ambient noise of the cafe. "The medical report you showed me confirming Ethan is completely sterile opened up a very specific line of inquiry. If your husband is biologically incapable of fathering a child, then your sister Sophia obviously had to find a donor to make her little miracle pregnancy a reality." I took a slow sip of my black coffee, feeling a cold wave of anticipation wash over me. "What did you find, Garrison?" He leaned forward, tapping his index finger against the silver flash drive. "Your sister has not set foot inside a medical school classroom in 18 months. She failed her primary board exams twice and was quietly dismissed from the program. But she could not bear to lose her status as your parents' perfect golden child, so she kept up the facade. She pretended to go to clinical rotations while actually spending her nights at an illegal underground casino on the south side of the city. I set my coffee cup down staring at the flash drive. Sophia was a gambling addict. It made perfect sense. She had always craved high-stakes thrills and instant gratification, always wanting the reward, without doing any of the actual work. She got in incredibly deep. Tessa Garrison continued, his expression grim. She owes a massive amount of money to a man named Vince. He is a notoriously violent loan shark who operates out of the back room of that casino. When Sophia realized she could not pay him back, she started getting desperate. My surveillance team captured extensive high-definition photographs of her and Vince together over the past 3 months. They were not just playing cards, they were intimately involved. A sharp, humorless smile touched my lips. So Sophia realized she was pregnant with a violent loan shark's baby, I summarized calmly. And instead of facing the consequences of her own disastrous actions, she decided to seduce my greedy, opportunistic husband. She knew Ethan was desperate for a family, and she knew he had access to my wealth. She planned to trap him with the pregnancy, force a divorce, and use my assets to pay off her dangerous gambling debts. Garrison nodded in confirmation. Every single photograph, bank statement, and surveillance log proving her relationship with Vince is on that drive. She is playing a very dangerous game. I picked up the flash drive and dropped it into my designer bag. She is playing a game she has already lost, I corrected him. Thank you, Garrison. Your bonus will be wired to your account by noon. I left the coffee shop with a renewed sense of absolute purpose. Sophia had thought she could destroy my marriage, steal my home, and use my hard-earned wealth to clean up her own criminal messes. She had convinced my parents to mortgage their entire future to fund her lies. Now it was time to show them exactly what they had paid for. Later that same week, Sophia threw a lavish, over-the-top gender reveal party to celebrate her fraudulent pregnancy. She needed to maintain the illusion of her perfect life, and she needed to parade Ethan around in front of their social circle to solidify her new status. The party was held at the Oak Brook Country Club, an exclusive venue known for exorbitant membership fees and catering costs. I knew for a fact that my parents, Linda and Greg, had funded the entire ridiculous spectacle using the cash from their newly acquired second mortgage, the very same mortgage debt that my asset management firm currently owned. They were literally burning borrowed money to celebrate a lie, completely unaware that I held the match. I spent 2 hours preparing for the event. I chose an immaculate tailored crimson pantsuit that radiated power and absolute confidence. I paired it with diamond earrings and a flawless blowout. I did not look like a defeated, heartbroken wife. I looked like a billionaire walking into a boardroom to execute a hostile takeover. Before leaving my penthouse, I carefully prepared my gift for the occasion. I had taken the most damning high-definition surveillance photographs from Garrison's flash drive and had them professionally printed on glossy premium photo paper. I arranged the pictures inside a luxurious white leather-bound baby book. The cover was embossed with gold lettering that read, "Our Beautiful Miracle." I wrapped the book in expensive silver paper and tied it with a perfect silk ribbon. When I arrived at the Oak Brook Country Club, the valet tried to ask for my invitation. I simply handed him a $100 bill, bypassed the podium, and walked directly up the grand marble staircase toward the main ballroom. The double doors of the ballroom were thrown wide open. The space was decorated with sickening extravagance. There were thousands of pink and blue roses draped over every surface, a massive catered buffet, and a towering ice sculpture in the shape of a stork. 50 of my parents' most affluent friends and country club associates were mingling in their finest clothes, drinking expensive champagne and laughing. As I stepped into this grand foyer just outside the ballroom, my mother Linda spotted me. The polite, wealthy hostess smile vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer venomous panic. She set her champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray and marched aggressively toward me, positioning her body to physically block the entrance to the party. "What do you think you are doing here, Tessa?" Linda hissed, her voice vibrating with suppressed rage. She kept her tone low to avoid drawing the attention of her wealthy friends. "You were explicitly not invited." I smiled down at her, clutching my beautifully wrapped gift. "I would not miss my future niece or nephew's big day, Mom," I replied pleasantly. I came to drop off a present. You need to turn around and leave right now, Linda demanded, stepping closer to try and intimidate me. You are a jealous, bitter outcast, and you are not going to ruin Sophia's perfect day. We know exactly what you are doing, Tessa. Ethan told us you maliciously froze his business accounts to try and ruin his tech company. But your petty little revenge plan failed completely. Greg and I hired the best bulldog lawyer in the city. We are suing you for everything you are worth. We have all the funding we need to destroy your public relations firm and secure Ethan's future. I looked at my mother, feeling a fleeting moment of pity for her absolute ignorance. She was standing there in a designer gown, threatening to destroy me with money she had unknowingly borrowed from my own corporation. You should really read the fine print on your loan documents, Mom, I said smoothly, stepping elegantly around her rigid body. I did not give her a chance to respond or process my words. I bypassed her completely and walked straight through the open double doors into the center of the ballroom. My entrance did not go unnoticed. The bright crimson of my suit drew every eye in the room. The cheerful background music seemed to fade as 50 affluent guests turned to look at the woman they all knew was Ethan's soon-to-be ex-wife. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Sophia and Ethan were standing at the far end of the room, beneath a massive arch made of pink and blue balloons. Ethan looked up and saw me. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He tried to puff out his chest to look intimidating, but his hands were visibly shaking. Sophia glared at me, her eyes flashing with furious indignation as she protectively grabbed Ethan's arm. I did not stop walking until I stood in the exact center of the ballroom floor. The entire party had fallen completely silent. The country club elite watched with bated breath, waiting for the dramatic confrontation they assumed was about to happen. They expected me to cry, to beg, or to scream at the sister who had stolen my husband. Instead, I offered Sophia a radiant, genuine smile. The heels of my shoes clicked sharply on the polished hardwood floor as I closed the final distance between us. I held out the beautifully wrapped, luxurious white leather baby book. Sophia hesitated, looking at the silver package with deep suspicion. Take it, Sophia. I encouraged her, making sure my voice was loud enough to carry to the very back of the silent room. It is a special gift for the nursery. I know how much you value family. Sophia snatched the gift from my hands, desperate to maintain her image as the gracious victim in front of her wealthy peers. She ripped the silver paper away and stared at the gold-embossed cover. She let out a small, condescending laugh, preparing to deliver a sarcastic thank you speech to the crowd. But I did not give her the chance. I turned slightly to face the 50 guests who were hanging on my every word. I brought a gift for the baby's actual father, I announced clearly, letting my voice ring through the absolute silence of the ballroom. The collective gasp from the 50 affluent guests swept through the room like a sudden physical blow. Women in expensive designer dresses covered their mouths in shock. Men in tailored suits shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting rapidly between me, Ethan, and my suddenly very pale sister. My mother, who had been marching toward me to intervene and drag me out of the room, stopped dead in her tracks. Her jaw dropped, and for once in her perfectly curated image-obsessed life, she was completely at a loss for words. Ethan looked utterly bewildered. He blinked rapidly, his brow furrowing as he stared at the luxurious white leather baby book resting in Sophia's trembling hands. He did not seem to comprehend the magnitude of what I had just said. He still believed he was the brilliant architect of my destruction, completely unaware that he was simply a pathetic pawn in my sister's desperate criminal game. Sophia, ever the master manipulator, tried desperately to salvage the situation. She forced a wet, trembling laugh, looking out at the crowd of country club elites with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, Tessa," Sophia said, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. "You are so heartbroken and confused. I know losing Ethan has been hard on your mental health, but this is just a cruel, petty prank. We are not going to let your bitter jealousy ruin the celebration of our beautiful growing family." She looked around the room, silently begging the wealthy guests to agree with her narrative of the unhinged, discarded wife making a desperate scene. A few of my mother's close friends murmured in sympathetic agreement, casting highly judgmental glares in my direction. I did not break eye contact with my sister. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly at my sides. Open the book. Sophia. I challenged her, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. If it is just a petty prank, open it and show everyone the lovely pictures inside. Show your new family exactly what kind of mother you are going to be. Sophia had no choice. If she refused to open the gift, she would look incredibly guilty to the crowd watching her every move. She had to play the role of the gracious victimized sister to the bitter end. With hands that were shaking so violently, she could barely grip the silk ribbon. She pulled the silver bow apart. The expensive wrapping paper drifted to the polished hardwood floor. She held the pristine white leather book. The words "Our Beautiful Miracle" glinting in gold foil under the bright lights. Sophia opened the heavy cover. I watched her eyes drop to the first page. The transformation was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. The fake patronizing smile vanished from her face, as if it had been slapped away by an invisible hand. Her jaw went slack, her lips parting in a silent gasp of pure, unfiltered terror. The blood drained from her cheeks so quickly that I thought she might actually faint right there on the dance floor next to the towering stork ice sculpture. She was not looking at sweet, grainy ultrasound photos or pastel-colored nursery inspirations. She was looking at crystal-clear, high-definition surveillance photographs. Pictures of herself wearing dark, inconspicuous clothing sneaking through the rusted service doors of an illegal underground casino on the industrial south side of the city. Pictures of her sitting at felt-covered tables, pushing massive stacks of chips toward the dealer with desperate, bloodshot eyes. But the most damning photographs were on the second and third pages. Sophia clung tightly to the arm of a massive, heavily tattooed man with a thick, jagged scar running down his neck. The man was Vince, a notoriously violent loan shark who practically owned the underground gambling circuit in Boston. The private investigator's camera had captured them in undeniable, highly intimate embraces in the dark alleyways behind the casino. It had captured her handing him thick manila envelopes full of cash, and it had captured them disappearing into his private back office together week after week. "What is it?" Ethan asked, stepping closer to Sophia. He looked highly irritated by her sudden paralyzed silence. "What did she put in there to make you look like that?" Sophia slammed the heavy book shut and clutched it tightly to her chest, as if she could hide the contents from the entire world. "Nothing," she squeaked, her voice high and breathless with rising panic. "It is just garbage, Ethan. It is heavily photoshopped garbage. We need to throw it away right now. Let us just go cut the cake and ignore her." She tried to turn away and flee toward the catering tables, but Ethan was already reaching for the book. His frustration with the entire public spectacle finally boiled over. "Give it to me, Sophia," he demanded, grabbing the leather cover and forcefully yanking it out of her desperate grip. "I want to see exactly what kind of sick game she is playing with us." Ethan flipped the cover open. The ballroom remained trapped in a suffocating dead silence. Every single guest watched closely as Ethan's eyes scanned the glossy pages. I watched the arrogant, entitled posture melt completely away from his body. His shoulders slumped forward. His breathing stopped entirely. He stared at the high-resolution image of Sophia passionately kissing the scarred, heavily tattooed loan shark in the shadows of the illegal casino. He recognized the man instantly. I knew he would. Vince was not a quiet behind-the-scenes criminal. He was a known entity in the city's darker circles, a man whose violent reputation for breaking legs and destroying lives occasionally spilled over into the local news broadcasts. Ethan had lived in this city long enough to recognize the face of a man you absolutely never wanted to owe money to. "No," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking horribly. He flipped frantically to the next page, then the next, his eyes wide with a horrified, crushing realization. He looked at Sophia, who was now weeping real, genuine tears of absolute terror. "So, what is this?" he demanded, his voice rising in raw panic. "Who is this man? Why are you intimately involved with him?" "Ethan, please listen to me," Sophia pleaded, reaching out to grab his suit jacket with trembling hands. "It is a massive lie. Tessa hired someone to fake these pictures to destroy us. She is trying to frame me because she wants you back. You know how much she hates me and how much she resents our happiness. Please, you have to believe me." Ethan looked back down at the photographs. The lighting, the natural shadows, the undeniable raw reality of the images could not possibly be faked. The bright red timestamps on the surveillance photos matched the exact night Sophia had claimed she was pulling exhausting late shifts at the hospital for her medical school clinical rotations. The very same clinical rotations she had been unceremoniously kicked out of 18 months ago. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, entering Ethan's personal space. I leaned in close, making sure my voice was loud and clear enough for the first few rows of guests to hear, knowing the scandalous gossip would spread to the back of the room within seconds. "You are paying for a baby that belongs to a man who breaks legs for a living," I said cleanly and coldly. Ethan's head snapped up. He stared at me, his eyes begging me to tell him this was a joke, a terrible nightmare he could simply wake up from. "Your perfect, nurturing future doctor has a severe gambling addiction," I explained, maintaining intense, unyielding eye contact with my soon-to-be ex-husband. "She failed out of medical school a year and a half ago. She owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to Vince, the violent man in those photos. When she realized she could not pay him back and her life was in danger, she needed a rich, gullible target to bail her out. She found out about my hidden wealth, and she knew you had access to my accounts. She slept with the loan shark, got pregnant, and then seduced you to trap my money to save her own skin." Ethan dropped the white leather baby book. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, echoing thud, the pages falling open to display a crisp, undeniable photograph of Sophia and Vince locked in a passionate embrace. The visual evidence lay right at Ethan's feet for the entire country club elite to witness. "This is not happening," Ethan muttered, stumbling away from Sophia as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. "You told me this was our beautiful miracle. You told me you loved me and wanted to build a real family with me." "I do love you," Sophia sobbed, dark mascara running down her cheeks in ugly, jagged streaks. "I made a terrible mistake, but the baby could still be yours, Ethan. We can get a paternity test right now. We can fix this together." I let out a short, harsh laugh that cut sharply through her pathetic, desperate lies. "I already gave you his test results, Sophia," I reminded her loudly. "The official medical report is currently sitting on my dining room table. Ethan is completely sterile. There is absolutely zero chance that child shares a single drop of his DNA." Ethan stood frozen, trapped entirely between the humiliating public reality of his medical condition and the devastating truth of his mistress's betrayal. He looked over at my parents, who were standing at the edge of the crowd, clutching each other in horrified, paralyzed silence. They had mortgaged their entire retirement home to throw this lavish party and to fund his failed tech company, all to celebrate a violent loan shark's baby. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps yell at Sophia or beg for my help, but I was not finished. I had one final fatal blade to deliver, and I wanted to make sure it pierced straight through his arrogant, opportunistic heart. I leaned forward one last time, twisting the knife with absolute calculated precision. "By the way, you might want to check your credit score, Ethan," I advised him, my voice dripping with lethal sweetness. He blinked rapidly, his overloaded mind struggling to process yet another impending disaster. "My credit score," he repeated numbly, staring at me with hollow eyes. "Yes," I smiled broadly. "Because my private investigator found a few more interesting details in Sophia's hidden financial records. She did not just steal your heart to pay off a violent criminal. She needed hard cash immediately to keep Vince from breaking her legs while she waited for our divorce settlement to go through. She stole your social security number, Ethan. She completely stole your identity. And she has been taking out massive fraudulent loans in your name for the past 3 months." The ballroom of the Oak Brook Country Club erupted into absolute chaos. The wealthy guests, who had been standing in stunned silence, suddenly began whispering frantically to one another. Women grabbed their designer evening bags and men checked their expensive watches. Everyone was suddenly desperate to escape the toxic fallout of my family drama before it tainted their own reputations. The grand gender reveal party was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. Waiters froze with trays of expensive champagne, unsure of where to go. The string quartet stopped playing their classical music, leaving a heavy, awkward void in the massive room. The atmosphere shifted violently from celebration to a suffocating sense of public scandal. No one wanted to be associated with a family tied to an underground loan shark. Ethan stood completely paralyzed near the towering ice sculpture of the stork, His hands shook violently as he reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone. He ignored the loud gasps and murmurs of the fleeing crowd as he frantically typed his password into his mobile banking and credit monitoring applications. I stood my ground watching his eyes dart across the glowing digital screen. The remaining color drained from his face until his skin looked like pale ash. I was sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. His breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. There it was displayed in harsh digital numbers that he absolutely could not deny. A staggering mountain of debt that he had never authorized or even known about. $150,000 in high-interest personal loans. The credit accounts had been entirely processed under his Social Security number over the last 90 days. The money had been immediately funneled directly into untraceable offshore accounts to pay off the violent man from the surveillance photographs. Sophia had ruthlessly maxed out his excellent credit score to save herself. No, Ethan choked out his voice, cracking loudly as he swiped through notification after notification of freshly approved credit lines and massive balance alerts. No, this cannot be real. This has to be a mistake. It was entirely real. While Ethan had been busy betraying our marriage and plotting to steal my beautiful home, my sister had been busy destroying his financial future. He had thought he was the ultimate predator, finding a way to take my hard-earned wealth. But he was nothing more than the perfect prey for a woman who needed a quick, gullible target to save her own life. Sophia saw the horrifying realization settle over Ethan's face. The master manipulator knew she was rapidly losing her wealthy mark and her only ticket out of extreme physical danger. She lunged forward, grabbing his arm with desperate, trembling hands. Her meticulously manicured fingers dug into his expensive suit jacket. She let out a loud, theatrical sob that echoed across the emptying dance floor. She looked around the room, trying to find a sympathetic face among the departing guests, but found absolutely no one. Even our parents were backing away in sheer horror, completely unable to process the criminal reality of their golden child. "Ethan, please listen to me," Sophia cried, pressing her face against his shoulder and squeezing her eyes shut to produce massive fake tears. "I had to do it. Vince was threatening me. He said he would hurt me if I did not pay him back the gambling debts immediately. I was so scared. I was going to tell you the truth after the divorce settlement went through. I was going to pay you back with Tessa's money as soon as we got her house. We can still fix this. We can still take her business. We can be a real family just like we planned." Ethan stared down at the woman he had destroyed my marriage for. He finally saw her not as a brilliant medical student or a nurturing future mother, but as a calculated, desperate parasite. The romantic illusion shattered completely. He realized in that agonizing moment that he was completely ruined. He was financially tethered to a notorious loan shark and a woman who had used him as nothing more than a convenient, gullible shield. If Vince came looking for his money, he would come looking for the man whose name was on the fraudulent loans. The crushing weight of his monumental stupidity finally broke him. "Get your hands off me," Ethan roared. He shoved Sophia away with such force that she stumbled backward and nearly tripped over the discarded white leather baby book. "You ruined my life. You lied to me about everything. You are a monster." Ethan turned his back on my sister, my horrified parents, and the few remaining guests. He bolted toward the grand double doors, fleeing the country club in an absolute blind panic. He shoved past a bewildered waiter, knocking a tray of expensive glasses to the floor. The sound of shattering crystal followed him out into the dark night. He left Sophia weeping genuinely now on the hardwood floor, surrounded by thousands of pink and blue roses that my parents had paid for with their newly mortgaged retirement home. I did not stay to watch the country club staff clean up the mess. I turned on my heel and walked out to my waiting car, leaving the absolute wreckage of their lives behind me without a single ounce of regret. The very next morning, the private concierge at my luxury downtown penthouse called my personal cell phone. He sounded highly uncomfortable and deeply apologetic. He informed me that my husband was currently pacing the main lobby, demanding to be let up to my floor. Ethan had apparently been begging the front desk security team for over an hour, crying and making a massive public spectacle of himself in front of the other wealthy residents. He refused to leave until he spoke with me. Send him to the private guest lounge. I instructed the concierge calmly, taking a slow sip of my rich black coffee. I will be down in exactly 5 minutes. Keep security close by, but do not let them intervene unless he becomes violent. I took my time getting ready. I wanted him to sweat. I smoothed my tailored blazer, made sure my hair was perfectly styled, and deliberately put on the most expensive diamond watch I owned. I rode the private elevator down to the ground floor, feeling an immense sense of calm power radiating through my entire body. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of my own justice. When I pushed open the frosted glass doors of the guest lounge, Ethan looked up with desperate, bloodshot eyes. He looked like he had not slept for a single second. His clothes were incredibly wrinkled, his tie was missing, and his usual arrogant posture had completely evaporated. He looked like a broken, pathetic shadow of the man who had confidently demanded I sign over my house just a few days ago. The moment he saw me, Ethan actually dropped to his knees on the plush carpet. He crawled forward, reaching out to grab the hem of my coat with shaking fingers. The sheer desperation radiating from him was palpable. It was a pathetic display of cowardice from a man who thought he could outsmart me. "Tessa, please!" Ethan begged, his voice hoarse and completely pathetic. "You have to help me. I am so sorry. I made a massive, unforgivable mistake. Sophia manipulated me. She cast some kind of evil spell over me and twisted my mind against you. She targeted my insecurities about wanting a family and used them against me. I never actually wanted her. I always loved you, Tessa. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved. I was confused and lost, but I see clearly now. Please, you have to let me come home. We can fix our marriage. I will do whatever you want." I looked down at the man kneeling helplessly at my feet. I felt absolutely no pity, no lingering affection, and no sorrow for his self-inflicted misery. I felt only pure, unadulterated disgust. He was not sorry for betraying me. He was not sorry for breaking his vows or trying to steal my home. He was only sorry that his brilliant backup plan turned out to be a massive financial trap set by my sister. He wanted me to save him from the consequences of his own terrible choices. I took a deliberate step backward, forcing him to release my expensive coat. I reached up and casually tapped the front breast pocket of my blazer. My smartphone was tucked neatly inside the microphone exposed, and the recording application actively capturing every single pathetic, groveling word he had just spoken. I wanted his entire confession documented perfectly for my legal team. "You did not come back here because you love me, Ethan," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet lounge. "You did not come crawling back because you suddenly realized Sophia is a monster." Ethan froze, his tear-stained face looking up at me in pure confusion. "What are you talking about?" he whispered, his eyes darting to the pocket I had just tapped. I smiled down at him with absolute contempt. "You came back because the legal process server found you at your cheap motel this morning. You came back because you found the corporate espionage lawsuit I filed against you at 8 o'clock today." Ethan stared at the pocket of my blazer as if a loaded weapon were pointed directly at his chest. The utter confusion on his face slowly morphed into a look of absolute paralyzing dread. He scrambled backward on the plush carpet of the guest lounge, his hands raised defensively. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse, but no words came out. "You actually thought I was entirely oblivious, Ethan?" I asked, my voice smooth and conversational as I looked down at him. "You thought you could casually approach my vice president of accounts last Thursday and offer him a $50,000 bribe to download my master client list. You needed the contact information of my most lucrative elite public relations clients to impress a rival venture capital firm because your own startup was bleeding cash. You thought my employees were as disloyal and opportunistic as you are." Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "He told you," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with the realization that he had walked blindly into a massive, carefully orchestrated trap. "Of course he told me," I replied cheerfully. "He is a professional who values his career. We set up a decoy server for you. Every single file you downloaded to your personal hard drive over the weekend was completely encrypted with a tracking software that immediately notified my legal team. You committed corporate espionage against my firm, and you left a massive digital footprint doing it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen once, stopping the voice recording application. The screen flashed bright green, indicating a successful upload. And just to tie up any loose ends, I continued showing him the glowing screen. The audio file of you kneeling on this floor, admitting that you plotted with my sister to steal my assets, and begging for forgiveness has just been automatically uploaded to my legal team's secure cloud server. It is already in the hands of my lead litigator. Your confession is officially on the record. Ethan scrambled to his feet. He looked wildly around the private lounge, his eyes darting toward the frosted glass doors, as if he were calculating whether he could tackle me and steal my phone. He took one aggressive step forward, his fists clenching at his sides. I would not do that if I were you, I advised him softly. Right on cue. The frosted glass doors of the lounge swung open. Two uniformed Boston police officers stepped into the room, flanked by the building's head of security. Ethan froze his hands, dropping limply to his sides, as the officers approached him with heavy, purposeful strides. Ethan Williams, the taller officer, said, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You are in violation of a restraining order filed at 6 o'clock this morning by the property owner. You were legally mandated to remain 500 feet away from this building and from Tessa Anderson. Put your hands behind your back. Ethan did not fight them. The remaining fight had been completely drained out of him. He let the officers pull his arms behind his back and secure the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The sharp click of the locking mechanism echoed loudly in the quiet room. He looked at me one last time as they turned him toward the door. There was no anger left in his eyes, only the hollow, vacant stare of a man who realized he had systematically destroyed his entire life for absolutely nothing. I watched the officers escort him out of the lounge through the grand lobby and out into the busy city street, where a patrol car was waiting. I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. The dead weight of my toxic marriage had finally been permanently severed. I returned to my corner office and spent the next few hours working as if it were a perfectly normal Tuesday. I reviewed marketing campaigns, approved press releases for two major corporate clients, and enjoyed a light lunch delivered from my favorite bistro. I maintained absolute emotional control. I knew the final storm was coming, and I wanted to be perfectly grounded when it hit. The storm arrived exactly at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The heavy oak doors of my office burst open with such violent force that they slammed loudly against the interior walls. My mother Linda stormed into the room looking completely unhinged. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her expensive designer coat was buttoned unevenly. My father Greg followed closely behind her, his face dark red with fury. My security team hovered anxiously in the doorway waiting for my command. I simply raised a hand, signaling for the guards to step back and close the doors. I wanted this conversation to be entirely private. You are a monster! Linda screamed, marching directly up to my desk and slamming her expensive handbag onto the polished wood. You are a cold, vindictive, sociopathic monster, Tessa. We just got a frantic call from the police station. You had your own husband arrested like a common criminal. You froze his accounts, you stole his company, and you left your poor pregnant sister to deal with a violent loan shark all by herself. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I did not steal his company, Mom, I corrected her calmly. I stopped funding his failure. And Sophia's massive gambling debts are entirely her own responsibility. Linda planted her hands on my desk, leaning over to glare at me with pure venomous hatred. You listen to me right now, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. You are going to call the police and drop those ridiculous charges against Ethan. Then you are going to wire the funds necessary to pay off Sophia's debt to that horrible man. If you do not fix this right now, I am going to every major media outlet in this city. She pointed a threatening finger at my face. I have contacts at Boston Lifestyle magazine and the local news networks. I will tell them exactly who you really are. I will paint you as a jealous, bitter billionaire who maliciously destroyed her pregnant sister's life because you were too barren to give your husband a child. I will ruin your public relations business. No elite client will ever want to work with a woman who actively tries to destroy her own flesh and blood out of sheer, petty jealousy. Your reputation will be absolute garbage by tomorrow morning. My father stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with my mother. He pointed a stern, authoritative finger at me, trying to invoke the patriarchal control he had utilized my entire life. "You have gone way too far this time," Tessa Gregg shouted, his voice booming in the expansive office. "Family protects family. You do not throw your own blood to the wolves because your feelings got hurt. You are going to drop these lawsuits, you are going to forgive your sister for making a mistake, and you are going to help us clean up this mess. That is what a family does." I sat behind my massive desk, completely unmoved by their screaming, their threats, and their pathetic attempts at manipulation. I looked at the two people who were supposed to love and protect me unconditionally. They were perfectly willing to destroy my entire career and drag my name through the mud, simply to protect the golden child who had lied to them, stolen from them, and brought a violent criminal into their lives. "Your version of family has always been a one-way street of extreme exploitation," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, razor-sharp tone that forced them to stop yelling and listen. "Family does not protect family in this house, Dad. In this house, family protects Sophia. You have spent 33 years demanding that I sacrifice my happiness, my money, and my peace of mind to pave the way for her. You expected me to just hand over my $3 million home because she carelessly got knocked up by a criminal. You expected me to smile and step aside while she stole my husband. That was different," Linda protested, though her voice wavered slightly under my intense, unyielding gaze. "Sophia needed stability. Sophia needed to face the consequences of her own disastrous actions." I fired back, standing up slowly from my chair. "But you never let her face them. You covered up her failures. You paid her way through life. And when she finally failed out of medical school a year and a half ago, you helped her hide it from the rest of the world so you could maintain your perfect social image." My parents froze. The color drained simultaneously from both of their faces. They stared at me in horrified silence, realizing that I knew their deepest, darkest secret. "You thought I did not know?" I asked, walking slowly around the edge of my desk. "You thought I did not know that she was kicked out of her clinical rotations? You thought I did not know that you have been secretly paying her living expenses while she spent her nights blowing cash at an illegal casino?" "Tessa, please," my father started, his aggressive posture completely deflating. "We were just trying to help her get back on her feet. We were going to tell you." I stopped walking and stood directly in front of them. The air in the office felt heavily charged, thick with the impending weight of absolute destruction. "You are absolutely right about family, Dad," I said smoothly, reaching out to press the silver intercom button resting on the corner of my desk. "Family should always be held accountable for their actions." The heavy oak doors of my office swung open immediately. Two men dressed in sharp, unassuming suits walked into the room. They flashed gold badges clipped to their belts. They were detectives from the State Financial Crimes Division, and they had been waiting in my private conference room for the past 20 minutes. "Which is why I am having you both arrested for felony embezzlement," I announced, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. Linda gasped, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck. "Embezzlement," she choked out. "What are you talking about? We never stole anything from you." "Not from me," I corrected her, my voice turning to absolute ice. "From grandmother. I hired forensic accountants last week to look into the blind trust she left for Sophia and me. The trust that was supposed to be divided equally upon our 35th birthdays. The trust that you and Dad have been illegally managing as executors." The detectives stepped forward, flanking my parents on either side. My father looked like he was going to be physically sick right there on my expensive carpet. "You forged my signature on dozens of withdrawal authorizations over the past 10 years," I explained, laying out the brutal, undeniable truth of their financial crimes. "You systematically siphoned over $1 million out of my half of the inheritance. You used my money to pay for Sophia's fake medical degree, her luxury apartments, her designer clothes, and eventually her massive gambling debts. You stole my future to fund her lies." I stepped back, crossing my arms over my chest and offering them a final devastating smile. "You wanted to go to the media, Mom. You wanted to tell them a story about a cruel, vindictive woman destroying her family. I think the press is going to be much more interested in the story of two wealthy socialites being led out of a corporate high-rise in handcuffs for stealing from their own daughter." The lead detective did not hesitate for a single second. He stepped forward with absolute authority and pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Linda Anderson and Gregory Anderson, he said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. You are both under arrest for multiple counts of felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. My mother let out a guttural, horrifying shriek that echoed off the glass walls of my office. She physically recoiled, backing up until she hit the edge of my mahogany desk, knocking over a stack of file folders. You cannot do this to us! Linda cried out, her manicured hands fluttering wildly in the air as the detective forcefully grabbed her left wrist. We are prominent, respected members of this community. We donate heavily to the police charity fund every single year. You cannot treat us like common street criminals. The detective ignored her protests. He effortlessly secured the cold metal cuffs around her wrists, the sharp locking mechanism clicking loudly in the tense room. He turned to my father, who was standing frozen like a garden statue. Greg did not fight. He did not scream or argue. He simply held out his trembling hands, completely broken by the sudden crushing reality of his own catastrophic arrogance. As they were being secured by the officers, I walked slowly around my desk and leaned casually against the edge, looking down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. You stole from me for 10 consecutive years, I said, my voice steady and loud enough for my entire security team to hear. You siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars out of a trust fund that grandmother explicitly designed to be split equally between Sophia and me. You blatantly forged my signature on annual release forms. You funneled my rightful inheritance directly into her bank accounts to fund her lavish, pathetic lifestyle. My money paid for her designer clothes, her luxury vacations to Europe, and her expensive sports cars. And when she started failing her classes, you used my money to bribe medical school administrators to quietly cover up her academic disasters. You literally robbed your own daughter to subsidize a massive fraud. Tessa, please, my father begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his pale cheeks. We were going to pay it all back eventually. We just wanted Sophia to have a solid foundation. We wanted her to succeed so badly. You wanted a golden child to brag about at your affluent country club dinners, I corrected him coldly, crossing my arms over my chest. And you were perfectly willing to sacrifice my financial future to buy her that fake medical degree. I looked at the lead detective. Take them out of my building right now, I instructed clearly. Use the main elevator. I want every single one of my employees to see exactly what happens to thieves who walk into my firm. I watched without a single ounce of regret as my weeping mother and my shattered father were marched out of my office in handcuffs. The heavy oak doors closed securely behind them, and I was finally alone, breathing the clean, satisfying air of absolute justice. But the fallout from my actions was far from over. Across the city, Sophia was rapidly running out of options. With Ethan financially ruined and terrified, her parents locked in a holding cell with their assets entirely frozen by the state, and Vince, the violent loan shark, breathing down her neck for his gambling money, she was backed into a desperate, dangerous corner. Sophia knew she was going to lose everything. She knew the truth about her gambling addiction, her fake medical degree, and her fraudulent pregnancy was about to hit the public record. So she decided to strike first. She decided to play her ultimate victim card. Sophia contacted a prominent local lifestyle news outlet called Boston Elite Insider. It was a digital publication known for sensationalizing high society drama and catering to the wealthy suburban housewives who used to worship my mother. Sophia sat down for an exclusive, highly paid interview. She wept genuine tears of absolute panic, but she expertly spun them into a massive, calculated sob story designed to destroy me. She painted me as a jealous, tyrannical billionaire monster. She told the eager reporter that I had snapped out of sheer bitterness because I was a barren woman who could not give my husband a child. She claimed I maliciously destroyed her loving relationship with Ethan, illegally seized my parents' retirement home out of pure spite, and fabricated financial charges to have my own elderly parents thrown into a cold jail cell. She positioned herself as a poor, terrified, pregnant woman who was just trying to protect her unborn miracle baby from a wealthy, vindictive sister who wanted to ruin her life. The article dropped the very next morning with a massive, sensational clickbait headline: Billionaire public relations mogul destroys pregnant sister and jails parents over petty jealousy. The story went absolutely viral within a matter of hours. It was shared thousands of times across various social media platforms. The false narrative of the evil barren corporate overlord crushing her innocent pregnant sister resonated perfectly with the internet outrage machine. People who had never even met me were suddenly leaving thousands of hateful, aggressive comments on my business pages, calling me a sociopath, a narcissist, and a ruthless corporate monster. The immediate business backlash was severe and highly disruptive. My public relations firm experienced a sharp temporary dip in our stock valuation. The phone lines in my main office began ringing incessantly. Several of my high-profile corporate clients, elite executives, who paid my firm millions of dollars a year to manage their pristine public images, called my private line in a panic. They were incredibly nervous about the terrible optics of the situation. They questioned my character, asking if there was any truth to the viral article and demanding to know exactly how I planned to mitigate the massive scandal before it stained their associated brands. The atmosphere inside my firm became incredibly tense. The top executives on my crisis management team rushed into my downtown luxury penthouse apartment that evening, carrying thick stacks of printed analytics and social media engagement reports. They were sweating, pacing nervously across my expensive hardwood floors and speaking in panicked, rapid-fire sentences. "Tessa, this is a total disaster," my lead crisis manager said, dropping a thick red folder onto my glass coffee table. "The public sentiment is overwhelmingly against you right now." Sophia played the pregnant victim card perfectly. The internet loves a martyr, and they absolutely despise wealthy executives. "We are bleeding public goodwill every single hour this article stays trending online. Two of our biggest tech clients are threatening to pause their retainers until this whole situation blows over. What is our exact strategy here?" Another senior executive asked, wiping his forehead with a cloth handkerchief. "We need to release a public statement immediately. We need to draft a defensive, highly apologetic press release by midnight. We can claim it as a private family misunderstanding that simply got out of hand. We can offer to set up a small educational trust for the baby to show good faith and smooth things over with the public. We have to save the brand, Tessa. We have to apologize and make you look incredibly sympathetic." I stood silently by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out over the glittering Boston skyline. The city lights twinkled brightly in the dark night, a massive sea of beautiful, undeniable power. I listened to my highly paid executives panic behind me. I listened to them suggest that I should bow my head, publicly apologize to the treacherous sister who tried to steal my husband, and pay off the very woman who funded her illegal gambling addiction with my stolen inheritance. I slowly turned away from the panoramic window and looked directly at my terrified executive team. I was wearing a sleek ivory silk robe holding a delicate crystal glass of sparkling water. I did not look stressed, anxious, or defeated by the viral smear campaign. I looked entirely serene and untouchable. "We do not apologize to liars," I said, my voice cutting through the panicked chatter like a perfectly sharpened blade. The spacious living room went completely silent. My lead crisis manager swallowed hard, looking incredibly nervous. "But Tessa, the media narrative is destroying our reputation. Boston Elite Insider has millions of daily readers. They completely control the story right now." I walked over to the glass coffee table, picked up the printed article featuring Sophia's weeping, fraudulent face, and calmly dropped it into the nearby trash can. "They only control the story because they own the publishing platform," I explained smoothly, holding unwavering eye contact with my crisis manager. "And I do not play defensive public relations games with cheap tabloid journalists who fail to do basic fact-checking before trying to ruin my life. I play to win." I walked over to my modern desk, picked up my private cell phone, and dialed my lead corporate attorney. I put the phone on speaker mode so my entire executive team could hear the command clearly. "Harrison," I said when he answered on the very first ring. "I need you to contact the parent holding company of Boston Elite Insider right now. Draft the corporate acquisition papers immediately. Offer them 20% above their current market value for a total hostile buyout effective tonight." There was a sharp, audible gasp from one of my senior executives standing near the sofa. I looked out the window one more time, a slow, highly predatory smile spreading across my face. I am buying the news network. My lead corporate attorney, Harrison, did not hesitate or question the directive. He simply nodded from his square on the video conference screen and began marshalling his entire team of associate lawyers. Within 10 minutes, my luxury penthouse had transformed into a high-stakes corporate war room. The parent company of Boston Elite Insider was a struggling media conglomerate called Pinnacle Broadcasting. They were heavily overleveraged, poorly managed, and incredibly desperate for a massive cash infusion. Harrison contacted their board of directors at 2 o'clock in the morning with an aggressive hostile takeover bid that was 20% above their highest market valuation. The extremely lucrative offer came with a strict 24-hour expiration timer and a mandatory requirement for the immediate transfer of all controlling shares. While my legal team brutally strong-armed the corporate board members through the early hours of the morning, I received a highly anticipated phone call from Garrison, my elite private investigator. He had successfully tracked down Vince, the notoriously violent loan shark, from the surveillance photographs. Vince was apparently furious. Sophia's incredibly stupid decision to go to the media with her fake sob story had inadvertently drawn massive amounts of unwanted public attention to her life. Vince knew that any microscopic investigation into Sophia's finances would immediately lead local law enforcement straight back to his illegal underground casino operations. He was a pragmatic, ruthless businessman who wanted absolutely nothing to do with my sister's messy, very public divorce scandal. I authorized Garrison to offer the criminal a highly lucrative proposition. I would wire a massive, untraceable cash payment directly to his offshore accounts to cover every single dollar of Sophia's outstanding gambling debts. In exchange, Vince simply had to do one thing for me. He had to sit down in front of a professional camera and tell the entire city the absolute undeniable truth about his intimate relationship with the brilliant medical student. Vince accepted the cash buyout without a single second of hesitation. He was perfectly willing to throw my treacherous sister directly under the bus to protect his own highly illegal empire. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the ink on the digital corporate contracts was completely dry. I was the absolute majority shareholder and the sole controlling owner of Pinnacle Broadcasting. The arrogant executives working at Boston Elite Insider had absolutely no idea that their struggling parent company had just been liquidated and handed over to the very woman they were actively trying to destroy on the internet. At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, my black luxury car pulled up to the curb outside the downtown headquarters of Boston Elite Insider. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a striking emerald green tailored suit that demanded absolute attention and respect. Harrison flanked my right side, carrying a thick leather briefcase, and my head of private security flanked my left. We did not stop at the front reception desk to sign in as guests. We bypassed the security turnstiles completely using the overriding executive access keycards Harrison had acquired during the midnight buyout. The main newsroom was a sprawling, open-concept floor filled with ringing telephones, clacking keyboards, and glowing computer monitors. A massive digital display board hung prominently on the far wall, tracking the live online engagement metrics of their top articles. My sister's fabricated manipulative sob story was sitting comfortably at the #1 spot, generating millions of page views and massive amounts of advertising revenue. The employees on the floor were too busy capitalizing on my highly publicized misery to notice the three of us walking purposefully down the central aisle. We headed directly toward the glass-walled executive conference room located at the very back of the floor. Inside the room, the evening editorial meeting was in full swing. The editor-in-chief, a red-faced man with rolled-up sleeves, was standing at the head of the long table pointing enthusiastically at a printed copy of the viral article. The lead journalist who wrote the defamatory piece, a smug-looking man with a self-satisfied smirk, was leaning back in his chair and soaking up the excessive praise from his colleagues. They were openly celebrating the systematic destruction of my professional reputation as a massive quarterly victory for their publication. I pushed the heavy glass doors open without bothering to knock. The loud, sharp click of the metal latch instantly silenced the bustling conference room. The editor-in-chief frowned deeply, pointing a pen in my direction, as if to demand who let me into his secure meeting. Then he recognized my face from the very article he was currently holding in his hand. The smug, self-satisfied smirk completely vanished from the lead journalist's expression, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. I walked straight to the head of the conference table, projecting an aura of absolute, unyielding authority. The editor-in-chief scrambled backward out of his expensive leather chair, practically tripping over his own feet to get out of my way. I took his seat, folding my hands neatly on the smooth glass surface. Harrison stepped forward and dropped a heavy stack of certified corporate acquisition documents directly into the center of the table, right on top of their printed metrics reports. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice perfectly calm, pleasant, and lethally cold. "I know you are all incredibly busy capitalizing on a completely fabricated and highly defamatory hit piece about my private life, so I will keep this brief. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, my holding company successfully acquired Pinnacle Broadcasting. That means I now legally own this building, this publication, and every single one of your employment contracts." The silence in the glass conference room became absolutely deafening. The lead journalist swallowed hard, his face turning a sickly, horrifying shade of gray. He knew he had failed to do basic journalistic fact-checking. He knew he had published a highly libelous article based entirely on the unverified weeping testimony of a desperate woman. And he knew his career was completely over. "Madam CEO," the editor-in-chief stammered, his voice shaking visibly as he wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "We had absolutely no idea about the corporate acquisition. We can pull the article down from the website immediately. We can issue a full public retraction and a formal apology on the front page within the hour. We will fire the journalist who wrote the piece right now and strip him of his severance package." I looked at the terrified journalist who was sinking lower into his chair, as if trying to physically disappear into the upholstery. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, waiting for the lever to be pulled. He opened his mouth to apologize, to beg for his professional life, but the words caught in his throat. "I am not going to fire you," I said, looking directly into his panicked, wide eyes. "And I do not want you to pull the article down or issue a weak written apology that no one will ever bother to read. That is not how we are going to handle this situation. I want you to keep your job, and I want you to do it correctly this time." The room remained paralyzed, waiting for my ultimate command. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass table. "You published a highly sensationalized narrative without a single shred of actual evidence," I explained smoothly, never breaking eye contact with the trembling writer. "You wanted a dramatic, highly profitable story about a wealthy corporate villain and a poor pregnant victim. You wanted internet outrage, and you certainly got it. But you missed the actual story entirely. The real narrative is infinitely more dramatic, more scandalous, and much more profitable. And best of all, it comes with concrete, undeniable proof." I signaled to Harrison, who pulled a secondary folder from his briefcase and began passing out copies of the high-definition surveillance photographs to the terrified editorial board. I watched their eyes widen in absolute shock as they saw the clear images of the supposed medical student sneaking into the illegal underground casino and passionately kissing the heavily tattooed, violent loan shark. I watched the journalist realize that the poor pregnant victim he had just fiercely defended was actually a massive criminal liability. "We are going to tell the real story tonight," I announced to the paralyzed newsroom. "We are going to broadcast a live, unedited follow-up segment right from your main studio. You are going to get the highest ratings in your entire network history. Because the violent loan shark father of Sophia's baby just agreed to an exclusive live interview." The main studio of the broadcasting network was a flurry of highly controlled panic. The producers and camera operators moved with frantic, terrified precision under the watchful eyes of my corporate security team. I stood in the shadows behind the blinding studio lights, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the digital countdown clock on the main monitor. I had absolutely no intention of letting my sister control the public narrative for a single second longer. Sitting in the primary interview chair, looking entirely out of place on a polished news set, was Vince. The heavily tattooed loan shark wore a dark, tight shirt that did not even attempt to hide the thick, jagged scar running down his thick neck. He looked incredibly dangerous, completely unbothered by the bright lights and entirely focused on protecting his own illegal empire. The news anchor sitting across from him was sweating profusely, gripping his index cards with trembling hands. The red light on the primary camera flashed on. We were broadcasting live to millions of viewers across the entire city. The anchor swallowed hard and introduced the segment, stumbling slightly over his words as he explained that the network was issuing a massive, unprecedented correction to their previous story. He then turned to the imposing man sitting across from him. Vince did not wait for the anchor to ask a carefully scripted question. He leaned forward, staring directly into the camera lens with cold, predatory eyes. "I am here to clear my name," Vince stated, his rough, gravelly voice echoing through the studio. "That woman, Sophia Anderson, went on the internet crying about being a poor, innocent victim. She is not a victim. She is a compulsive gambler and a massive liability. And that baby she is carrying does not belong to the tech guy she is trying to extort. That is my kid." The studio control room erupted into a flurry of hushed, chaotic whispers. The live viewership metrics on the digital display board were skyrocketing at an unprecedented historic rate. "Sophia owes my organization over $200,000 in gambling debts." Vince continued, pulling a thick stack of folded papers from his pocket and dropping them onto the glass news desk. "These are the promissory notes she signed with her own hand. When she realized I was going to collect my money, she panicked. She told me she was going to sleep with her wealthy brother-in-law, get pregnant, and use his money to pay me off. She orchestrated this entire scam to save her own skin. I am not letting some bankrupt, gullible tech bro raise my child, and I am definitely not taking the fall for her massive financial fraud." He looked directly into the camera, delivering the final fatal blow. "She is a liar, a thief, and a degenerate gambler. She took out fraudulent loans in that guy's name to pay me the first installment. I have the wire transfer receipts right here." I watched the broadcast from the shadows, feeling a profound, absolute sense of satisfaction. Sophia had tried to use the media as a weapon to destroy my life. Now that exact same weapon was broadcasting her darkest, most dangerous secrets to the entire world. The truth was finally out, completely unedited and entirely undeniable. Miles away from the gleaming downtown television studio, Ethan was sitting on the edge of a sagging, stained mattress in a cheap roadside motel room. He stared at the small, flickering television screen mounted on the peeling wall. The volume was turned up, filling the dingy room with the sound of the violent loan shark exposing his utter, catastrophic humiliation to the entire city. Ethan watched the glowing screen with hollow, devastated eyes. His smartphone, resting on the cheap laminate nightstand, began vibrating violently. The notifications flooded his screen in a relentless, punishing wave. News alerts, text messages from former colleagues, and mocking comments on his professional networking profiles. He was no longer a respected tech founder or a brilliant entrepreneur. He was a national joke. He was the gullible, sterile Mark who had destroyed his own marriage to raise a violent criminal's baby. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged, agonizing sob. The luxurious life he had so arrogantly demanded from me just a few days ago was completely gone. He was financially tethered to a massive mountain of fraudulent debt, entirely isolated and facing imminent corporate espionage charges. His social and financial ruin was absolute. Across the city, in their affluent suburban neighborhood, my parents were experiencing their own rapid, terrifying downfall. Linda and Greg sat in their living room watching the same live broadcast in horrified, paralyzed silence. Linda frantically picked up her phone, dialing the numbers of her closest friends, the wealthy socialites she had played tennis with for over a decade. Every single call went directly to voicemail. Nobody wanted to be associated with a family that was currently trending for grand larceny, underground gambling, and associating with violent loan sharks. Greg opened his laptop, desperately hoping to find some kind of legal loophole to save their heavily mortgaged retirement home. Instead, his email inbox pinged with a priority notification. It was an official automated message from the board of directors at the Oak Brook Country Club. "Due to recent public revelations involving severe breaches of our organizational morality and criminal conduct clauses," the email read in cold, formal text, "your family membership has been permanently revoked. effective immediately. You are strictly prohibited from entering the premises. The carefully curated, pristine social image. My parents had spent 33 years aggressively protecting vanished in a matter of seconds. Their social standing was entirely vaporized. They were instantly transformed into complete social pariahs, shunned by their colleagues, locked out of their elite circles, and heavily burdened by an insurmountable mountain of debt that I legally controlled. The absolute climax of their mutual destruction occurred 3 days later on the cold gray morning of their initial fraud and embezzlement hearing. My private driver pulled my luxury black car up to the curb directly across the street from the downtown Boston courthouse. I did not step out immediately. I sat in the plush leather seat looking through the tinted windows at the pathetic, chaotic spectacle unfolding on the wide concrete steps of the legal building. Because they were all co-defendants in various intersecting lawsuits and criminal investigations, Ethan, Sophia, Linda, and Greg were forced to face each other in public. The intense pressure of their impending legal doom had finally caused them to completely snap. They were standing near the towering stone pillars of the courthouse engaging in a spectacular, vicious screaming match for the entire city to witness. Local reporters and news cameras formed a tight circle around them, eagerly recording the dramatic collapse of the Anderson family. "You ruined my entire life!" Ethan screamed, his face bright red as he pointed an aggressive, shaking finger at Sophia. "You lied to me about the baby. You stole my identity. You trapped me in a massive pile of fraudulent debt with a criminal. You are a disgusting, manipulative parasite." Sophia screamed right back at him, her voice shrill and completely unhinged. "You are a weak, pathetic mark, Ethan. You were so desperate to feel like a powerful man that you believed whatever I told you. You threw away a billionaire life because your ego was too fragile to handle her success." Linda tried to grab Sophia's arm to quiet her down, terrified of the flashing camera lenses capturing their public disgrace. Sophia violently shoved our mother's hand away. "Do not touch me," Sophia shrieked, turning her absolute fury onto our parents. "This is entirely your fault. You raised me to be a dependent, useless trophy. You always told me my looks were my only asset. You handed me everything on a silver platter and never taught me how to survive in the real world. You covered up my failures instead of helping me fix them. You made me into this." Greg stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides as he glared at Ethan. "You came into our home and destroyed our family," my father yelled, attempting to deflect the blame entirely onto his former son-in-law. "You could not even protect your own assets. You were so stupid you accidentally handed the deed to our daughter's house right back to her holding company. You are a monumental failure." They were turning on each other like cornered, desperate rats. All the false loyalty, all the performative family affection, and all the superficial support completely evaporated. When faced with the severe absolute consequences of their own toxic actions, they instantly cannibalized one another to save themselves. I watched their vicious public implosion for a few moments longer, feeling a profound, untouchable sense of peace. I reached for the door handle and stepped out of the luxury car. I was wearing an immaculate tailored black suit and carrying a sleek leather briefcase. The reporters noticed my arrival instantly. The camera lenses swiveled in my direction, but my private security team expertly formed a protective wall, clearing a wide, unobstructed path up the concrete steps. I walked directly toward the chaotic, screaming group. As I approached, their shouting faltered and died in their throats. Ethan, Sophia, Linda, and Greg stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. They looked completely broken, exhausted, and hopelessly defeated. They expected me to stop. They expected me to gloat, to scream back at them, or to revel in their public humiliation. I did not even turn my head to look at them. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely serene, and my eyes focused straight ahead. I walked right past them, completely ignoring their pathetic existence, as if they were nothing more than invisible ghosts haunting the courthouse steps. The sharp, confident click of my heels echoed loudly against the stone, a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of absolute victory. I reached the heavy mahogany doors of the courthouse and pushed them open, stepping into the grand, quiet interior of the legal building. I walked past the security checkpoints and entered the primary courtroom, taking my designated seat at the plaintiff's table alongside Harrison and my elite legal team. The large, imposing room was completely silent, the atmosphere thick with impending justice. A moment later, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened. My parents and my soon-to-be ex-husband were escorted inside by court officers looking thoroughly destroyed. They shuffled toward the defendant's table, unable to make eye contact with me or with each other. The heavy side door near the bench swung open. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice ringing out clearly across the tense, silent room. "All rise," the bailiff announced, commanding absolute attention. I stood up tall, straightening my blazer, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline and profound clarity. The judge walked up to the bench, his expression stern and unforgiving. He picked up his wooden gavel, ready to officially dismantle the lives of the people who had tried to destroy mine. The final gavel was about to drop. The sharp crack of the wooden gavel echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. The bailiff called the room to order and instructed everyone to take their seats. I sat perfectly still beside my lead corporate attorney, Harrison. Across the wide aisle, my parents and my soon-to-be ex-husband slowly sank into their heavy wooden chairs. They looked completely drained of all their former arrogance. The judge was an imposing man with 30 years of experience on the bench. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the massive stack of black binders resting on his desk. These binders contained the absolute entirety of my meticulously gathered evidence. Harrison stood up and buttoned his tailored suit jacket. He approached the bench with a quiet, undeniable confidence. "Your Honor." He began, his voice projecting clearly across the vast room. "We have submitted comprehensive forensic accounting records detailing a decade of severe financial abuse. We have also provided digital server logs proving corporate espionage and certified copies of fraudulent property deeds." The judge opened the first binder. The silence in the room was agonizing for the people sitting at the defense table. I watched my mother Linda gripping the edge of the wooden table so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. My father Greg was staring at the floor. He could not even bring himself to look at the judge. Ethan was practically hyperventilating in his seat, while Sophia sat beside him looking entirely shell-shocked. "Let us begin with the corporate espionage charges," the judge said. His stern eyes moved from the paperwork directly to Ethan. "Mr. Williams, the digital evidence provided by the plaintiff is highly irregular in its thoroughness. It appears you accessed a secure decoy server and downloaded proprietary client lists belonging to your wife's public relations firm. The tracking software embedded in those files registered your personal internet protocol address. Do you deny this action?" Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but his voice completely failed him. His expensive defense attorney stood up quickly to intervene, but the judge held up a hand to stop him. "The digital footprint is undeniable," the judge stated firmly. "You engaged in a deliberate, calculated attempt to steal corporate trade secrets to salvage your own failing technology startup. Furthermore, you attempted to fraudulently transfer the deed of a $3 million marital asset into a shell company to hide it during an impending divorce. You demonstrated a profound lack of respect for the law and for the institution of marriage." Ethan shrunk down into his chair. He looked like a terrified child. The judge turned his attention to the second binder. "Now we move on to the matter of the family trust fund." The judge flipped through several pages of high-resolution bank statements. The financial records provided by the forensic accountants paint a deeply disturbing picture of parental exploitation. Over a period of 10 consecutive years, the executors of this trust systematically siphoned funds meant for Tessa. My mother let out a quiet, desperate sob. She tried to reach for my father's hand, but he pulled away from her. "These stolen funds were funneled directly into personal accounts belonging to Sophia," the judge continued. "The money was used to pay for luxury vehicles, exotic international vacations, and fraudulent academic expenses. You severely breached your fiduciary duties. You violated the fundamental trust placed in you by the deceased. You literally robbed your own daughter to fund a lifestyle of pure deception for your other child." The defense attorney representing my parents stood up. "Your Honor," he said weakly, "my clients were simply trying to manage family assets in a way they believed was best for everyone. They intended to replenish the funds eventually." The judge glared at the attorney with absolute disgust. You do not replenish over $1 million of embezzled trust funds by taking out a desperate second mortgage on a retirement home. Your clients engaged in grand larceny and wire fraud. They abused their power to strip the plaintiff of her rightful inheritance. There is no acceptable justification for this level of systematic financial abuse. I sat perfectly still and watched my family completely fall apart. They had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure. They had told me I was a disappointment because I chose to build a business instead of playing their superficial social games. Now they were sitting in a public courtroom, being legally branded as thieves and criminals by a superior court judge. The judge closed the heavy black binders and folded his hands on top of the desk. The time for judgment had arrived. Ethan Williams, the judge, announced, his voice booming with finality. Based on the overwhelming evidence of corporate espionage and attempted asset fraud, I am formally indicting you. You are considered a flight risk and a danger to the corporate entities you have targeted. You will be remanded into state custody immediately pending a full criminal trial. Ethan gasped loudly. He looked around the courtroom in sheer panic as two armed bailiffs stepped forward and grabbed him by the arms. They pulled his hands behind his back and secured them with heavy steel handcuffs. Ethan began to cry softly as they marched him away from the defense table. He did not look at Sophia. He did not look at my parents. He looked back at me with an expression of pure, agonizing regret. I did not blink. I simply watched the heavy wooden doors close behind him, locking him away from the luxurious life he had so arrogantly tried to steal from me. The judge then turned his piercing gaze to my parents. "Linda and Greg," he said coldly, "your actions are some of the most disgraceful examples of parental exploitation I have ever seen in my courtroom. You are hereby ordered to repay the stolen trust funds to the plaintiff in full. With the legally mandated interest applied over the past 10 years, the total amount you owe your daughter is $1.2 million. This repayment is effective immediately." My mother let out a loud, horrifying wail. "We do not have that kind of money," she cried out, completely ignoring the courtroom decorum. "We spent everything. We took out a massive loan just to pay for our lawyers and to help Ethan. We are completely bankrupt. We have absolutely nothing left." The judge did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. "That is the inevitable consequence of living far beyond your means and funding your lifestyle with stolen money," he replied sharply. "You will liquidate whatever remaining personal assets you possess. Your wages will be heavily garnished. You will face severe legal penalties until every single cent is returned to your daughter." My parents sat there in the devastating reality of their total financial ruin. They were completely and hopelessly bankrupt. The wealthy, affluent life they had built their entire toxic identities around was gone forever. They had no money left to pay for their country club memberships. They had no funds to buy designer clothes or throw lavish parties. They were broke, and they were publicly disgraced criminals. Sophia sat frozen at the end of the table. She had lost her wealthy Mark when Ethan was dragged away in handcuffs. She had lost her endless source of funding when our parents were ordered to repay the stolen trust fund. She was left completely alone with a mountain of violent gambling debt and absolutely no one to save her. The judge organized his papers and looked down at his final document. "There is one final matter we need to address before this court adjourns," he said. He looked directly at my parents. "You recently took out a massive second mortgage to fund your various legal defenses and personal debts. You put up your primary residence as collateral for this desperate loan." My parents looked up with terrified, exhausted eyes. The judge then turned his attention to me. "Miss Anderson," he said, his tone shifting to one of professional respect, "I see here that your private asset management firm legally acquired the debt for that second mortgage earlier this week. Since the defendants are now officially declaring total bankruptcy, they are in immediate default of that loan agreement." I stood up slowly from my chair and smoothed the front of my tailored black blazer. "Yes, Your Honor," I said clearly. The judge nodded. "As the sole owner of that debt, you now have the absolute legal right to seize the collateral property immediately. What would you like to do with the property?" I looked over at my parents. I looked at the sheer terror in their eyes as they realized they had literally handed the keys to their beloved mansion directly to the daughter they had abused and discarded. I smiled a slow, calculating smile that made my mother physically flinch. I have plans for it, Your Honor, I said. The transition of absolute power was swift and entirely unmerciful. Exactly 48 hours after the judge delivered his final ruling, my private security team coordinated directly with the local county sheriff to execute the lawful eviction. I drove my luxury sedan through the familiar winding streets of the affluent Boston suburb. The towering ancient oak trees cast long dark shadows over the perfectly manicured lawns of the neighborhood. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of my parents' estate and parked my car. The house was a sprawling, ostentatious colonial mansion that my mother had spent decades meticulously decorating to project an image of absolute flawless superiority. It was the very same house where I had been systematically ignored, belittled, and treated as a defective scapegoat, while Sophia was paraded around as the ultimate prize. I stepped out of my car and leaned against the polished hood. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks, but I felt incredibly warm inside. I watched in utter silence as the armed sheriff deputies escorted my family out of the grand mahogany front doors. Linda, Greg, and Sophia were not allowed to pack up their expensive antique furniture, their sparkling crystal chandeliers, or their massive collections of designer jewelry. Those highly valuable assets now belonged entirely to the state bankruptcy court to be officially liquidated and distributed to their massive list of creditors. They were only permitted to take their absolute basic living necessities. They stumbled awkwardly down the wide brick driveway carrying a few pathetic black plastic garbage bags filled with cheap clothing and basic toiletries. My mother wept openly, her face buried in her trembling hands as she looked back at the towering mansion that had defined her entire shallow, superficial existence. My father walked with a heavy, pronounced limp, looking completely shattered and entirely hollow. They huddled together on the cold public sidewalk just outside the property line. They watched in absolute horror as a fleet of massive yellow construction vehicles rumbled heavily down the quiet suburban street. I had not come to claim the house so I could live in it or sell it to another wealthy family. I had absolutely no intention of letting them rent it back or finding any other way to profit from the physical manifestation of my lifelong trauma. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, clear signal to the demolition foreman standing near the heavy equipment. The enormous diesel engines roared to life, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. The heavy steel treads of the bulldozers tore mercilessly into the pristine, perfectly manicured lawn my mother had obsessed over for 30 years. The massive mechanical arms swung upward and smashed violently into the grand front pillars of the house. The deafening sound of shattering glass and tearing wood echoed across the entire neighborhood. A massive, thick cloud of white dust and debris billowed up into the clear blue sky. My mother let out a loud, agonizing scream as the master bedroom suite, where she had plotted so many of her toxic manipulations, completely collapsed inward. I watched the walls cave in, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation. The physical monument to their greed, their arrogance, and their cruelty was being systematically erased from the earth right in front of their eyes. I turned my attention away from the falling debris and looked at the man standing right beside me. Donovan was the brilliant lead architect of my firm and one of the few people in the world I genuinely trusted. He was tall, with kind, intelligent eyes and a quiet, steady presence that had been my absolute anchor through the chaotic legal battles of the past few weeks. He smiled at me, a warm, genuine smile that reached all the way to his eyes, and unrolled a massive sheet of detailed blueprints directly onto the hood of my car. We weighed down the corners of the heavy paper with our hands to keep the crisp autumn wind from blowing it away. "It is going to be incredibly beautiful," Tessa Donovan said, pointing to the intricate structural designs on the paper. "The foundation is exceptionally solid, and the framing can begin by early next month once the debris is entirely cleared." I looked down at the blueprints, feeling a deep, resonant swell of pure pride. I was not just destroying my toxic past. I was building a permanent, powerful sanctuary for the future. The blueprints outlined a massive state-of-the-art community center and a highly secure transitional shelter for women recovering from severe financial abuse and domestic manipulation. It would have fully equipped counseling offices, private residential suites, and a massive peaceful community garden. I traced my finger over the elegant architectural lettering printed at the very top of the page. The facility would be named the Eleanor Harrington Center in honor of my late beloved grandmother. She was the woman whose trust my parents had maliciously raided to fund my sister's lies. And she was the only person in my bloodline who had ever truly believed in my potential. As Donovan and I discussed the final landscaping details and the timeline for the charitable foundation, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Sophia had separated herself from our weeping bankrupt parents on the sidewalk. She walked slowly toward my car, her posture completely defeated. The expensive designer clothes she used to flaunt at the country club were replaced by cheap wrinkled sweatpants and a faded shirt. Her hair was messy and unwashed. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant golden child who had smugly demanded I sign over my house just a few short weeks ago. She looked terrified and utterly broken by the reality of her own terrible choices. "Tessa, please," Sophia whispered, stopping a few feet away from the front bumper of my car. Her voice was raspy and raw from hours of crying. "I do not have anywhere else to go. Vince is looking for me everywhere. He knows Ethan is sitting in a jail cell, and he knows Mom and Dad are completely bankrupt. He sent his men to my cheap motel room last night. They banged on the thin door and said they were going to break both of my legs if I did not have his gambling money by Friday." I looked at my sister, feeling absolutely no pity, no familial obligation, and no desire to save her. "I am begging you, Tessa." Sophia sobbed, heavy tears tracking through the dirt on her pale cheeks. "I know I was terrible to you. I know I ruined everything and tried to steal your life. But I am your sister, and I am pregnant, and I am so incredibly scared. Just give me $5,000. Just enough cash to buy a bus ticket and get out of the state so I can hide from him. It is absolutely nothing to you. You are a billionaire. Please just give me a tiny handout to save my life." I reached slowly into the inner breast pocket of my tailored black blazer. Sophia watched my hand with wide, desperate eyes, fully expecting me to pull out my checkbook or a thick stack of $100 bills. She still believed that playing the desperate victim would magically solve her problems. Instead, I pulled out a glossy trifold paper pamphlet. It was the newly printed informational brochure for the Eleanor Harrington Center. I held it out to her, keeping my arm perfectly steady. Sophia stared at the paper and slowly reached out to take it, her hands shaking violently as she grasped the brochure. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a confused, devastated whisper as she read the words printed on the cover. I looked her directly in the eyes, projecting absolute, unyielding authority. "There is a bed open at the temporary shelter downtown while we finish building this new facility." I told her, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any emotional attachment. "They provide secure, undisclosed housing for women in active danger. They will protect you from Vince and his men, and they will help you find a low-wage entry-level job so you can start paying off your massive fraudulent debts yourself." Sophia stared at the pamphlet, the crushing realization of her new bleak reality settling heavily over her trembling shoulders. "You are not going to give me any money," she choked out, the tears spilling over her eyelashes. I shook my head slowly. "I do not fund criminals, and I do not bail out toxic people who try to destroy my life," I said. "There is a safe bed open for you, Sophia. You just have to actually follow the rules and do the hard work like everybody else." I turned my back on her completely and went back to studying the architectural blueprints with Donovan. I heard Sophia let out a quiet, pathetic, defeated sob. She did not argue or scream or try to manipulate me any further because she finally realized she had absolutely zero power left. She simply turned around, clutching the paper pamphlet in her trembling hands, and walked slowly away down the sidewalk, disappearing into the shadows of the street. I did not look up to watch her go. The heavy machinery continued to roar loudly in the background, tearing down the final standing walls of my childhood prison and making way for a beautiful, powerful new beginning. 1 full year passed since that crisp autumn day. The thick white dust from the demolished mansion had long since settled and washed away completely, replaced by something infinitely more enduring and profoundly beautiful. But the dust from my toxic family's catastrophic collapse never quite cleared for them. They were forced to live every single day in the suffocating wreckage of their own terrible choices. Ethan tried desperately to secure a favorable plea bargain, But the digital evidence of his corporate espionage and attempted asset fraud was entirely airtight. His expensive defense attorney could do absolutely nothing to save him. Ethan is currently serving a mandatory 3-year sentence in a federal minimum security facility. He spends his days working in the loud, sweltering prison laundry room, completely stripped of his tailored designer suits, his arrogant startup pitches, and his fragile ego. He is no longer a brilliant tech founder. He is simply an inmate serving time for his own monumental greed. Sophia's spectacular downfall was equally brutal. Vince, the violent loan shark, quickly realized she had absolutely zero access to my wealth and no wealthy parents left to bail her out. He immediately recognized that she was a completely worthless asset. He abandoned her entirely, though not before ensuring she was legally chained to every single dollar of her massive gambling debt. Today, the former golden child and fake medical student works a grueling minimum wage job at a massive discount retail warehouse on the outskirts of the city. She spends 8 agonizing hours a day on her feet wearing a cheap polyester uniform stocking heavy shelves and dealing with aggressive customers. She lives in a tiny, run-down apartment constantly looking over her shoulder, desperately trying to pay down a mountain of fraudulent debt that will likely follow her for the rest of her natural life. She lost the baby shortly after the stress of the trial, a complication she had to face entirely alone. But perhaps the most severe and satisfying fall from grace belonged to my parents. Linda and Greg were completely stripped of their gaudy mansion, their elite country club memberships, their luxury vehicles, and their hollow dignity. They now live in a cramped, unheated studio apartment in a highly undesirable industrial neighborhood. To comply with the judge's aggressive, relentless wage garnishment orders for my stolen trust fund, they were forced to re-enter the workforce in their late 60s. My mother, the woman who used to spend her leisurely afternoons sipping expensive champagne, buying diamond jewelry, and viciously judging other women, now folds clothes at a local discount department store. My father, who once prided himself on his untouchable corporate status and patriarchal authority, now scans barcodes as a tired, broken grocery store cashier. Every single month, a massive percentage of their meager minimum wage paychecks is automatically routed directly into my corporate asset accounts. They spend their golden years working themselves to the bone, silently paying me back for a lifetime of theft and emotional abuse. They have absolutely no assets, no friends, and no family left to manipulate. While they were busy paying for their sins, I was busy building my future. Exactly 1 year after the disastrous dinner party that ended my marriage, I stood in the bright, welcoming foyer of the Eleanor Harrington Center. The space was nothing like the cold, intimidating colonial mansion that used to sit on this exact plot of land. The center was filled with brilliant natural light, warm, vibrant colors, and the sound of genuine healing laughter. It was a state-of-the-art facility designed specifically to provide secure housing, financial literacy training, and intensive trauma counseling for women recovering from severe financial and emotional abuse. The grand opening event was spectacular. The expansive community garden planted exactly where my mother's pristine, untouchable lawn used to be was packed with my true supporters. My fiercely loyal public relations executives mingled with local city officials, charitable donors, and the brave, resilient women who had already found safe refuge within these walls. There were no fake country club smiles or performative displays of wealth. The air was filled with absolute authenticity and profound gratitude. I walked up the few steps to the beautifully crafted wooden podium set up in the center of the garden. The lively chatter of the crowd quieted down as they turned their attention toward me. I did not walk up to that stage alone. Donovan stood right beside me. Over the past 12 months, the brilliant lead architect of my firm had helped me build so much more than just this incredible physical facility. We had built a true, healthy partnership based on absolute respect, mutual admiration, and genuine, unwavering love. He was everything Ethan had pretended to be, but with none of the manipulation or fragile ego. Donovan did not feel threatened by my success or my wealth. He celebrated it. He stood by my side, a quiet, steady, and profoundly comforting presence, holding my hand with a gentle strength that grounded me perfectly. I looked out at the diverse smiling crowd, feeling a massive surge of pure, unadulterated joy. Thank you all for being here today. I began my voice projecting clearly and confidently across the beautiful garden. A little over a year ago, I stood on this exact same piece of land and watched a structure fall to the ground. That structure was built on a foundation of conditional love, toxic expectations, and profound deceit. It was a place where appearances mattered more than truth, and where loyalty was something that had to be bought, sold, and manipulated. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the faces of my dedicated colleagues and the women we were actively helping. But today, we stand together on a completely new foundation. I continued squeezing Donovan's hand. We stand in a place built on absolute resilience, authentic support, and the fundamental belief that every single person deserves to be safe, valued, and respected. We built the Eleanor Harrington Center to ensure that no woman ever has to stay in a dangerous or abusive situation simply because she lacks the financial resources or the community support to leave. I looked down at the engraved plaque bearing my grandmother's name. For a very long time, I believed that family was defined strictly by bloodlines and legal documents. I told the attentive crowd. I believed that I had to endlessly earn my place at a table where I was never truly wanted. But I learned the hard way that true family is completely chosen. It is comprised of the people who show up for you in your darkest, most terrifying moments. It is built with the people who celebrate your victories without jealousy, who defend your character when you are not in the room, and who hold your hand when you are rebuilding your life from the ashes. You get to choose your family, and more importantly, you get to define your own worth. The crowd erupted into loud, genuine applause. My executive team cheered enthusiastically, and several of the women residing at the center wiped happy, hopeful tears from their eyes. Donovan leaned over and kissed my cheek, his eyes shining with profound pride. I looked out at the vibrant, thriving community I had built from the complete destruction of my toxic past. I realized in that beautiful, crystal-clear moment that my value was never tied to my family's broken bloodline. It was never dependent on my mother's conditional approval, my father's financial manipulation, or my sister's deceitful competition. My worth belonged entirely to me, and I had used it to create something that would heal and empower hundreds of other lives. I stepped down off the wooden stage, leaving the podium behind. I walked hand in hand with the man who truly loved me, stepping forward into a bright, secure, and incredibly hard-earned future. I left the dark, suffocating shadows of my toxic family entirely behind me, buried forever beneath the solid, unbreakable foundation of my beautiful new beginning. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family environment to finally build a better, healthier life for yourself? How did you find the courage to define your own worth when the people closest to you tried to tear you down? Share your personal experiences and your stories of resilience in the comments section below. If my journey of reclaiming my power and finding true justice resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and thriving against all odds. Thank you for listening to my story today, and always remember that your worth is defined entirely by you and absolutely no one else. Life has a remarkable way of revealing people's true character, not when everything is going well, but when money, power, jealousy, and personal desires enter the picture. The story of Tessa is far more than a tale of betrayal and revenge. It is a powerful reminder that self-respect, wisdom, and emotional strength are often the greatest forms of justice. While revenge may seem satisfying on the surface, the real victory comes from refusing to let other people's choices define your worth. One of the strongest lessons this story teaches is that trust should never replace discernment. Love requires vulnerability, but it should never require blindness. Tessa loved her husband with sincerity, supported his dreams financially, and believed she was building a future with someone who shared her values. Instead, she discovered that the person closest to her had quietly become the greatest threat to her happiness. Betrayal rarely arrives from strangers. It usually comes from those who have earned our confidence. That reality is painful, but it also reminds us to pay attention to actions rather than words. Consistency, Honesty and respect reveal a person's true character far more than promises ever will. Another important lesson is that enabling bad behavior only creates bigger disasters. Throughout the story, Sophia never truly faced the consequences of her actions because her parents constantly protected her. Every mistake was excused, every failure was hidden, and every reckless decision was someone else's responsibility to fix. When people are repeatedly rescued from the results of their own choices, they often learn that manipulation is easier than accountability. Eventually, the consequences become too large for anyone to hide. Healthy love does not mean shielding someone from responsibility. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to experience the natural outcome of their decisions so they have the opportunity to grow. The story also highlights the importance of financial independence. Tessa's success was not simply measured by the wealth she accumulated, but by the freedom it provided. Because she had built her own career, protected her assets, and understood the value of preparation, she was never trapped by the people who wanted to exploit her. Financial independence is not about greed. It is about security, dignity, and the ability to make decisions without fear. No one should ever have to remain in a toxic relationship simply because they cannot afford to leave. Building your own stability creates options, and options create freedom. Equally important is the lesson that boundaries are an act of self-respect, not selfishness. Many people are taught that saying no makes them cruel or unkind, especially when family is involved. Yet this story demonstrates the opposite. For years, Tessa sacrificed her peace to satisfy people who never appreciated her sacrifices. Every compromise only encouraged greater demands. The moment she finally established firm boundaries, those who benefited from her generosity accused her of being heartless. This is a common pattern in unhealthy relationships. People who are accustomed to taking advantage of your kindness often become angry when you stop allowing it. Their disappointment does not mean your boundaries are wrong, it usually means they were benefiting from your lack of them. Another powerful takeaway is that emotional control is often stronger than emotional reaction. Throughout the story, Tessa does not win because she screams louder, seeks public sympathy, or acts impulsively. She wins because she remains calm, while everyone else loses control. She gathers evidence, thinks strategically, protects herself legally, and refuses to let anger dictate her decisions. Emotional intelligence is not the absence of feelings. It is the ability to choose thoughtful responses instead of reckless reactions. In real life, this skill can protect careers, relationships, and personal well-being far more effectively than revenge fueled by rage. The story also reminds us that integrity always outlasts deception. Lies can create temporary victories, but they eventually collapse under their own weight. Ethan and Sophia believed they were clever enough to manipulate everyone around them. For a while, their plan appeared successful. However, every lie required another lie to support it until the entire structure eventually crumbled. Truth has a remarkable way of resurfacing, even when people spend enormous effort trying to bury it. Building a life on honesty may seem slower, but it creates a foundation that can withstand difficult times. Forgiveness is another theme worth considering, though perhaps not in the way many people expect. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean welcoming toxic people back into your life or pretending their actions never happened. Sometimes forgiveness simply means refusing to carry hatred forever. It means releasing the emotional burden while still protecting yourself with healthy boundaries. Tessa's greatest achievement was not humiliating those who betrayed her. It was reclaiming her peace. She no longer allowed their actions to control her future. That is a far deeper victory than revenge alone. This story also teaches that success is the best response to those who underestimate you. Instead of wasting energy trying to convince others of her value, Tessa focused on becoming stronger, wiser, and more successful. She invested in herself, protected what she had built, and allowed her accomplishments to speak louder than arguments ever could. Many people spend years seeking validation from individuals who have already decided not to appreciate them. Real confidence grows when we stop chasing approval and start living according to our own values. Perhaps the most inspiring lesson is that difficult endings often become new beginnings. Betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment can feel like the end of everything we once believed in. Yet those painful moments often force us to discover strengths we never knew we possessed. They push us toward healthier relationships, better decisions, and a deeper understanding of ourselves. While no one wishes to experience betrayal, many people eventually realize that the experience became the turning point that led them toward a far better life. Finally, this story reminds us that our greatest responsibility is to ourselves. We cannot control the choices of others, but we can control our own character, our standards, and the future we choose to build. We deserve relationship based on mutual respect, rather than convenience, honesty, rather than manipulation, and loyalty, rather than selfishness. When someone repeatedly proves they do not value those principles, walking away is not failure, it is wisdom. Every ending creates space for something healthier to enter our lives, provided we have the courage to let go of what no longer deserves a place in our hearts. In the end, the greatest lesson is simple, yet powerful. Never sacrifice your dignity to keep people who are willing to sacrifice yours. Self-respect is not arrogance. It is the quiet decision to protect your peace, honor your values, and believe that you deserve relationships built on trust, kindness, and genuine love. When we choose ourselves without becoming bitter, we discover that true justice is not watching others fall, it is rising above everything that once tried to break us. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the importance of self-respect, knowing your worth, and never allowing others to take advantage of your kindness, we'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Did this story remind you of someone, or did it teach you a valuable lesson? Share your experience in the comments below. We read every message and love hearing from our amazing community. If you enjoyed this journey, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our newest stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating powerful, emotional, and inspiring stories filled with unforgettable moments, meaningful life lessons, and characters who leave a lasting impact. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to sharing another unforgettable story with you very soon.